The Middle Ages were a time of mysterious and often shocking transformation. Imagine a manuscript, a book made of animal skin, its pages filled with intricate illustrations and elegant handwriting, passing from hand to hand across centuries. Each time it was copied, the text changed, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. This was not a world of fixed, unchanging texts, but one where every new copy was a new creation, a living, breathing document that evolved with each scribe and reader. Since the 1990s, scholars have debated how to understand these changes. Some argue that the variations we see in medieval manuscripts are errors, mistakes made by scribes who misread or skipped lines, or who altered the text to fit their own tastes. Others, however, see these changes as a sign of creativity, a way for scribes to make the text relevant to new audiences and patrons. This debate is not just about how we read the past, it's about how we understand the very nature of literature and its transmission. For centuries, the traditional view was that a text should be fixed, stable, and unchanging. Textual critics, using methods refined over generations, worked to create a single, authoritative version of a work, purging it of errors and restoring it to its supposed original form. But the idea of a single, perfect text is a modern one, not a medieval one. In the Middle Ages, the concept of a fixed, unchanging text was not the norm. Manuscripts were copied by hand, and each copy was a unique product of its time and place. Medieval poets and authors, like Guillaume de Lorris and Jean de Meun, who wrote the famous Roman de la Rose, wanted their works to last, but they understood that preservation meant adaptation. The process of copying a text was not just a mechanical task, it was a creative act. Scribes were not just replicators, they were interpreters, often adding their own insights and changes to the text. This is where the concept of mutable stability comes into play. Imagine a bridge that can bend and flex without breaking. A medieval text is like that bridge. It can change and adapt, but it still retains its essential structure and meaning. This balance between stability and transformation is a defining characteristic of medieval culture. On one hand, the Middle Ages were a time of deep conservatism, where tradition and the past were highly valued. On the other hand, it was a time of innovation and creativity, where new ideas and forms constantly emerged. To understand this, let's look at the Roman de la Rose, a poem that was copied and adapted for over 300 years. The earliest versions, like the one shown in Figure 3.1, are from the late 13th century. The text is written in a script that is clear and elegant, with beautiful illustrations that bring the story to life. But as time passed, the copies of the Rose changed. By the 15th century, as shown in Figure 3.2, the script and style had evolved. The illustrations became more detailed and ornate, reflecting the changing tastes and techniques of the time. The differences between these versions are not just in the text and the script. They are also in the visual elements that accompany the text. Manuscripts were not just collections of words, they were complex works of art. They included miniature paintings, decorative initials, and marginalia, notes and drawings that scribes added to the edges of the pages. These elements helped to convey the meaning of the text and to make it more engaging for the reader. For example, the courtly vices painted on the walls of the Jardin de Déduit, pleasure garden in the Rose, are depicted differently in each version. In the earlier manuscript, the vices are simple and straightforward, while in the later version, they are more elaborate and detailed. This shows how the visual elements of a manuscript can change over time, reflecting the changing cultural and artistic context. The Rose was not just a text, it was a dynamic, living document. Each copy was a product of its time, shaped by the scribes who created it and the patrons who commissioned it. The manuscript was a reflection of the social, economic, and cultural conditions of the time. In the 13th century, Paris was the cultural capital of Europe, a center of luxury and refinement. Manuscripts produced there were often works of great beauty, with high-quality illumination and careful attention to detail. But by the 15th century, the world had changed. The 100 Years' War and the Black Death had left their mark, and the manuscripts of the time reflect a different set of values and concerns. The Rose is a prime example of how a text can remain stable while also evolving. It retained its core narrative and themes, but it adapted to the changing world around it. This is the essence of mutable stability, a text that can bend and flex without losing its identity. The manuscript was not just a means of transmitting a text. It was a complex, multi-layered object that combined text, image, and material in a way that was both functional and artistic. The physical base of the manuscript, whether parchment or paper, supported the text and the visual elements. The layout of the pages, the script, the illustrations, and the marginalia all worked together to create a rich and engaging reading experience. For instance, the first page of a manuscript, known as the incipit, often included a miniature painting that gave the reader a glimpse into the story. Marginal decorations and elaborate initials added to the visual appeal and helped to guide the reader through the text. Rubrics, or short labels written in red ink, provided commentary and context. Marginalia, notes and drawings added by scribes or readers, sometimes offered additional insights or interpretations. These elements were not just decorative. They were integral to the manuscript's function. They helped to convey the meaning of the text and to make it more accessible to the reader. The rose is a particularly rich example of this, with its intricate visual and textual elements working together to create a complex and engaging narrative. The production of a manuscript was a highly skilled and often collaborative process. Scribes, illuminators, and patrons all played a role in creating a finished product. The quality and style of a manuscript could vary widely depending on the purpose, the patron, and the time and place of its production. A manuscript intended for a royal or noble patron might be lavishly illustrated and written in a fine script, while a manuscript produced for a more modest audience might be simpler and less decorated. This dynamic process of creation and adaptation is what makes medieval manuscripts so fascinating. They are not just static texts. They are living documents that reflect the changing world around them. Each copy of a manuscript tells a story, not just of the text itself, but of the people who created it and the times in which it was produced. The rose is a testament to the enduring power of literature and the creative spirit of the Middle Ages. In the early 1400s, Christine de Pizan presented her collected works to Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, the wife of Charles VI of France. This presentation is depicted in a miniature from a manuscript now housed in the British Library. The image shows Christine humbly offering her work to the Queen, a moment that highlights the importance of patronage and the dynamic nature of medieval manuscripts. Medieval manuscripts were not just static objects, but dynamic systems that evolved over time. The stress on these codices came as much from their function, what they were designed to do, as from external forces. The primary source of this stress was the process of textual transmission. From the earliest vernacular manuscripts to the end of the Middle Ages, texts had to balance the need to reproduce a work from the past, whose name and popularity were already known, with the necessity of adapting to current tastes and styles. This meant that medieval literary works had to maintain narrative continuity, while also undergoing changes to remain relevant. This paradox can be understood through a famous quote from Giuseppe Lampedusa's novel, Il Gattopardo: "Things must change so they can remain the same." While Lampedusa's statement is an exaggeration, it helps us grasp the complexity of medieval textual transmission. The concept of sameness in the medieval world was very different from our modern understanding. In an age where texts were copied by hand, the scribe's perception and interpretation played a significant role in what was considered the same between the original and the copy. The 13th century saw a growing interest in theories of vision, with major treatises written by scholars like Ibn al-Haytham, Robert Grosseteste, Roger Bacon, and Whitelow. These works explored the mechanics of vision, geometric perspectives, and the interaction between the perceiver and the perceived. One of the most innovative texts that engaged with these theories was Le Roman de la Rose. Le Roman de la Rose is a long poem divided into two parts, the first by Guillaume de Lorris and the second by Jean de Meun. Guillaume's section, written around 1235, is a dream vision that explores the relationship between seeing and believing. He asserts that his dream was so vivid and detailed that it later came true in real life. He begins the poem with the lines, "Many people say that dreams are nothing but lies and stories, but it's possible to dream dreams that are not at all mendacious." Guillaume's dream becomes a metaphor for the act of love, where the lover's gaze transforms the beloved into an image that alters the lover's perception of himself and the world. The eyes, according to Guillaume, are central to this process, guiding the lover into the snare of erotic vision. One of the most famous scenes in the poem is set at the fountain of Narcissus. When the sun's rays hit the fountain, the colors refract through two crystals at the bottom, creating a mesmerizing effect. The crystals act like prisms, reflecting the garden in a way that captivates the viewer. Guillaume uses this scene to illustrate the power of mediated sight, where the lover is ensnared by his own reflection and the image of the beloved. The poem's narrative is not just a dream vision, but a complex exploration of perception and imagination. The lover's gaze, both physical and psychic, leads to a transformation of self. Love, in Guillaume's view, is a force that changes the lover from a free agent into someone governed by the rules of love. In a scene at the fountain of Narcissus, the lover sees not himself, but the image of the beloved, refracted through the crystals. This moment is depicted in several illuminated manuscripts, such as the one in the Munich State Library, where the lover is shown gazing into a pool that reflects his image and the rosebush. The image in the pool represents both the Narcissus visage and the rose, symbolizing the lover's fate. Another manuscript, now in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, shows the lover leaning over a turbulent pool with a rosebush behind him. The rubric explains that the author gazed into the pool and saw a rosebush covered with roses. The mirror in the fountain is a powerful tool that reveals the hidden aspects of the garden, but it also poses a danger to the viewer, who may be changed by what he sees. Guillaume's exploration of vision and love is a testament to the complex nature of medieval texts. The act of copying and transmitting these works involved not just the reproduction of words, but the interpretation and reimagining of the text by each scribe. This process ensured that medieval literary works remained relevant and dynamic, even as they were passed down through generations. In the dream vision of Guillaume de Lorris, the mirror serves as a critical symbol that connects perception and moral philosophy. Guillaume believes that what is seen in the mirror is true and reflects the nature of love. The mirror's ability to reflect without deceit is key because it determines two types of erotic love, one that is benevolent and morally acceptable, and another that is deadly and destructive. When the mirror reflects the benevolent type of love, it aligns with the concept of courtly love, or finimers. In this vision, the mirror is a medium that links the lover and the beloved, creating a unity where two hearts become one. This idea is illustrated in the poem through the Fountain of Love, where Cupid, the son of Venus, sows the seeds of love, coloring the fountain and making it a symbol of the love that poets and writers have celebrated throughout history. However, the mirror has another, more dangerous face. This is the Narcissus principle, which Guillaume explores by retelling the story of Narcissus from Ovid. Narcissus, the proud and beautiful youth, falls in love with his own reflection and eventually dies. Guillaume emphasizes the fatal consequences of this self-obsessed gaze, where the mirror becomes a tool of self-destruction. He links this idea to the Christian concept of the 7 deadly sins, particularly the sin of luxury, which is characterized by self-indulgence and excessive pleasure. In Christian iconography, the mirror symbolizes this sin, often depicted as a woman holding a mirror while primping, as seen in the rose window at Notre Dame de Paris. Guillaume further illustrates the Narcissus principle through the character of Oisius, the gatekeeper of the garden of pleasure. Oisius is described in great detail, emphasizing her beauty and elegance. She wears a gold circlet and a circlet of fresh roses, and she holds a mirror, symbolizing the sin of luxury. Oisius's name, meaning indolence, and her self-indulgent lifestyle highlight the dangers of the intransitive, deadly gaze. Her role as the first allegorical personification the lover encounters in the garden sets the stage for the moral journey that follows. The contrast between the benevolent and deadly forms of love is a recurring theme in the poem. The lover, who is also the poet, experiences this duality through his interactions with various characters. Each character represents a different aspect of love, and the lover's journey is a quest to understand the true nature of love. The parallax principle of perception, where different characters see the same thing in different ways, is a key element of the poem's structure. For example, the virtues and vices in Prudentius's Psychomatia see luxuria differently, and the lover and the poet see the same events from different perspectives. This parallax principle is also evident in the different views of love, expressed by characters like Amor, Venus, Racine, and others. The poem itself is a dialogue between these perspectives, and the reader is invited to participate in this dialogue by reflecting on the different interpretations of love. The interaction between the perceiver and the perceived is crucial, as it reflects the medieval belief in the principle of resemblance. This principle suggests that the way we perceive the world shapes our understanding of it, and that our perception is influenced by our moral and spiritual state. In the context of the Roman de la Rose, the mirror and the garden are not just symbols but active participants in the narrative. They reflect the moral and spiritual journey of the lover, and the reader is invited to join this journey by engaging with the poem's rich allegorical landscape. The mirror, in particular, serves as a powerful metaphor for the dual nature of love, and the choice between a life of self-indulgence and a life of meaningful, benevolent love. Augustine, unlike Ambrose, sought to distinguish between the concepts of image and likeness, as they relate to humans being made in God's image. According to Augustine, image refers to the model, while likeness is the dynamic process of embodying that model. This idea is rooted in the opening chapters of Genesis, where God creates humans in his image and likeness, granting them dominion over the earth. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26-27 emphasizes that God created humans in his image, with specific attributes that reflect his nature. The repetition of the verb created in these verses underscores the idea that humans, though created in God's image, exist in various states collectively as man, individually as him, and in their sexual differentiation as male and female. This variability highlights the potential for change and growth within the human condition. Augustine saw this variability as a sign of human potential for transformation. He believed that humans, while inherently bearing the image of God, could move closer to or further from this image through their actions and thoughts. This movement is not physical but spiritual, a matter of likeness or unlikeness to God. Absolute likeness to God is found in Scripture and the divine word, while absolute unlikeness is found in formless matter, which lacks the image of God. For Augustine, the goal of human life is to approach God through a process of spiritual renewal. This renewal involves putting off the old man and putting on the new, a concept he developed early in his career. The image of God, though deformed by sin, is never entirely lost, and humans can work to restore it through spiritual practices and contemplation. This idea of spiritual transformation is closely tied to the concept of beauty and proportion. Augustine and later church fathers saw beauty as a reflection of the divine order, a material manifestation of the good. By contemplating beauty, humans could bridge the gap between the spiritual and the material worlds. This contemplation required an engagement of the intellect, particularly through the senses of sight and hearing. Sight, especially associated with reading and inner vision, was paramount in Augustine's hierarchy of the senses. The act of reading, as seen in Augustine's conversion in the Confessions, directs understanding and can lead to spiritual transformation. Similarly, hearing, particularly of music, was elevated by Boethius, who showed how musical harmony reflects the divine principles of proportion and order. This sensory and intellectual engagement with external objects, such as texts or music, can change a person's entire being. Reading or listening is not a passive activity, but an active process of assimilation and synthesis. The reader's world view is both shaped by the text and, in turn, shapes the reader's understanding of the text. This dynamic interaction between the reader and the text is evident in the transmission of manuscripts. Traditionally, scholars have focused on identifying the best text by comparing manuscripts and attributing variations to scribal errors. However, a different perspective suggests that these variations reflect the active engagement of scribes and readers with the text. The process of manuscript transmission, therefore, is not just about reproduction, but also about representation and interpretation, where the text is continually reformed and revised through the lens of the reader's understanding. The study of the Roman de la Rose and its manuscripts reveals a dynamic process of transmission that goes beyond mere copying. This process, known as differential repetition, shows how the Rose evolved over time, adapting to new artistic and literary norms. Manuscripts of the Rose from the 14th and 15th centuries, for example, often incorporated new textual insertions, rubrics, glosses, and miniatures, reflecting the aesthetic preferences of their time and place. This dynamic adaptation is not just a mechanical function, but a creative act. The scribes and illuminators who produced these manuscripts were not just copying the original text, they were also interpreting and reimagining it. This reinterpretation was influenced by the broader literary and artistic context in which the manuscripts were produced. For instance, the Rose manuscripts often reflect the styles and techniques of other vernacular works created at the same time, such as de Guileville's Pèlerinage de la Vie Humaine or Christine de Pisan's works. These works, in turn, engaged with the Rose, creating a reciprocal influence. The concept of energeia, or being at work, helps explain this generative process. Energeia describes the active and transformative nature of manuscript production. The scribes and illuminators were not just reproducing the text, they were also creating new versions that responded to the demands and tastes of their patrons. This means that the Rose was not a static work, but a living text that evolved through its transmission. The Dusseldorf Rose, for example, contains significant interpolations and is notable for its unique historical context, having been seized by the Nazis in the 1930s. Other manuscripts, like the Frankfurt Rose and the Stuttgart Rose, are celebrated for their illuminations by notable masters of the period. These manuscripts can be traced back to specific Parisian bookshops, such as those run by Richard and Jean de Montbaston or Thomas de Maubuge. These workshops produced a variety of texts, including the Rose, the Pèlerinage de la Vie Humaine, and the Bible Historiale, which often referenced the Rose and shared similar artistic styles. The interplay between the Rose and these other works is particularly evident in the manuscripts produced by the Montbaston and Maubuge workshops. Jean de Montbaston, for example, illuminated several Rose manuscripts and the Pèlerinage de la Vie Humaine, and her work shows a clear generative dialectic. The same can be seen in the Stuttgart Rose, which was painted by the master of the Duc de Berry, and its connection to the works of Guillaume de Machaut, who was influenced by Jean de Meun's poetics. In summary, the study of the Roman de la Rose and its manuscripts reveals a rich and dynamic process of transmission. This process is not just about copying the text, but about creating new versions that reflect the artistic and literary context of their time. The manuscripts of the Rose, therefore, are not just copies but authentic forms of artistic representation that participate in the ongoing evolution of the work.